Smoke rises from kitchen vents across the country every night, but behind some doors the heat comes from something far worse than a busy grill. Council reports logged cockroaches packed behind splashbacks, freezers, drifting toward room temperature, and raw meat stacked above ready-to-eat dishes. Inspectors wrote those findings down in plain language, yet the reality feels heavier when you picture the scenes: a blade smeared with yesterday's grease, a cold tap running where there should be hot water, a chef working in a room where pests move faster than staff. And these aren't fringe takeaways tucked behind an alley. Some of them sit on crowded high streets. One carries a trail of glowing online reviews. One belongs to a hotel that charges hundreds for a night's sleep. Another was loved by diners who never saw the warnings taped to the back door. Tonight we'll walk you through 7 of the most infamous recent UK cases, the ones worth knowing if you care about your wallet and, more importantly, your guts. Stay sharp. 1. Phonar. A narrow gust rolls along Old Kent Road as evening traffic presses forward, and Phonar's shuttered storefront sits in that flow like a missing tooth in an otherwise busy grin. People once slipped through its doorway for a warm bowl after work, trusting the place the way you trust somewhere that feels lived in and steady. Staff moved quickly, bowls clattered, and regulars spoke of it with the fond tone you reserve for a spot that asks little more than your appetite. That familiarity cracked in mid-August 2025. Inspectors entered for what should have been a routine check and found containers marked as goat wrapped in leaves. The samples sent to the lab did not match the label. Tests confirmed dog meat. The visit stretched over several days and the scene widened with each hour droppings along the back edge of storage units. Bodies of cockroaches pooled near warm corners of the kitchen. Live insects moving in the shadows behind appliances, and traces of handling that suggested shortcuts taken far too often. The officers documented everything, sealed what needed sealing, and shut the doors. Southwark Council filed charges shortly after. The case was passed to Bromley Magistrates Court with a hearing date set for late December. The owners denied wrongdoing, at first insisting the lab samples were mistaken, then shifted to quieter comments about supply confusion, though the paperwork never supported that explanation. The charges remained on the docket. The discovery stung more than one community. Vietnamese diners do not treat Pho lightly. It carries the smell of family kitchens, late-night stops after long shifts, and weekend gatherings where broth is coaxed for hours. Seeing a restaurant with pho above its entrance tied to dog meat pushed a deep embarrassment through the community. Conversations moved from shock to disappointment, not only because of what was found, but because of how it scraped at a dish that carries a country's pride across continents. English diners felt something different, but just as sharp. Phonar held a 4.6 rating on Google before the closure. Many trusted those stars more than the sticker on the window. Diners posted photos of steaming bowls and crisp herbs without imagining what lay in the back room. When the reports became public, that trust buckled. A familiar shop had pulled the rug from under people who only wanted a warm meal without checking the corners of the kitchen. The restaurant remained shut. The shutters came down in August and stayed down through autumn and winter. Closure is the consequence you expect when a place trips every wire in the rulebook, mislabeled meat pest activity, unsafe preparation, and a breakdown of management control. No business survives conditions like that with its doors open. The absence of customers, the lack of movement behind the glass, and the quiet stretch of dust near the threshold feel like the only outcome that fits what happened inside. The whole affair leaves an ache on several sides. A dish that means home to many was dragged through headlines. Diners who trusted online ratings had their confidence shaken. Inspectors walked out with reports no one wants to write. The message sits in the silence: left behind your meal is only as safe as the standards behind the door, so look past the charm of a crowded room and check who keeps the place honest. 2. Harington Tandoori, Hilton. Phonar fell in one violent drop, yet Harington Tandoori slipped in another direction, wearing its calm frontage, while something older and more stubborn kept stirring inside. The sign glowed softly above the pavement, the curtains hung without fuss, and nothing about the outside hinted at the movement inspectors had already tracked through its rooms for years. Their notes formed a timeline no surface could disguise. A customer reported a cockroach crossing a table in late 2023, and officers arrived to find insects in the bar, the kitchen, the storeroom, and the service areas. The place agreed to close, though the relief was temporary. December brought another inspection, and the insects had returned. February followed with more findings, and the record stretched into a line of repeated patterns. By the time January 2025 arrived, the company and its manager stood before magistrates, admitting to several counts of failing to keep food safe. The fines were steep, and the manager walked out with a prohibition order that barred him from running any food business for 18 months. From the road, though, none of that history showed. Cars passed lights reflected on the windows, and the restaurant looked like somewhere you could sit with your family after a long day. The tables appeared ready, the cutlery waited in small stacks, and the warm orange bulbs turned the interior into something that felt almost gentle. That is the clasher place that looked steady from the street, while the inspection photos described a kitchen where swarms gathered behind equipment, where floors carried trails of movement, and where cleaning had lost its meaning long before officers arrived. Picture a family stepping in without suspicion. Parents glance at the menu, children settle at the table, and the scent of spice reaches them with an easy promise. None of them would imagine what lived beyond the swing door. None would guess that insects moved near stored ingredients, or that the same surfaces preparing their meal had struggled under a tide of neglect. A child might lean forward in excitement, not knowing what the officers found near the fryer weeks earlier. A parent might ask for naan, unaware of the insects clustered near the base of the counter. The room would look harmless and the danger would stay hidden. That thought lands with weight. How many evenings passed like that, and how many meals were served before the reports forced the doors shut? No answer arrives for that, and the silence around it sits heavier than any conclusion. Responsibility returns to the people who guide the kitchen each day. Kitchens slip only when those treat rules as options. When cleaning becomes an afterthought, pests return. When inspections become interruptions instead of warnings, conditions collapse. The officers did not uncover a single accident here. They uncovered a pattern shaped by choices. Choices to ignore droppings near storage. Choices to keep trading after problems resurfaced. Choices to treat long-term failure as something that could be managed with quick fixes. Restaurants survive on trust. They ask for it with every plate they send out. That trust cracks when owners forget the duty that comes with heat knives and raw ingredients. It falls apart when a dining room's charm is used as a curtain instead of a reflection of the kitchen behind it. Harington Tandoori shows what happens when image floats one way and responsibility drifts another. Owners who run places like this hold the weight of every family that sits at their tables, and they owe those families more than warm lighting and polite service. They owe them clean preparation, reliable oversight, and the discipline that keeps a meal safe. Integrity is not decoration. It is work done every day, even when no one is watching. 3 Hut Grill. The next one is even more bitter to me because I'm close to a man who once held this place as if it was stitched into his early life. His name is Thomas Whitaker, and when we were young, Hut Grills meant something simple to him. A stop after college shifts, a plate shared with friends, a corner seat where he sat with the woman who later became his wife. Then work pulled him out of Uxbridge, and years drifted by without a single visit. He returned only recently, carrying that quiet hope people have when they revisit the places that made them feel steady. He walked in as if nothing had changed. The counter was in the same place, the stools tilted at the same angle, and the menu still held the items he used to order without thinking. He didn't hesitate. He asked for the same grilled chicken, The same sides, the same drink he always reached for during those easy years. Memory does that, it edits the world until you think it will greet you with the same warmth. What arrived at his table scraped that illusion away. The chicken carried a dull sheen, and the surface lacked any sign of proper sear. Steam rose in thin threads that died before they reached his chin. The chips sagged in the paper tray, pale at the edges, as if they'd waited too long in air that should have been colder. When he lifted the fork, the weight of the meat felt wrong, loose in places where it should have held firm. A faint sour note drifted upward, not sharp enough to alarm someone rushing through a meal, but unmistakable to someone who knew how this dish once tasted. He chewed once, then again, and the texture folded in his mouth like something that had lost its structure hours ago. He stopped halfway. The tray sat in front of him with a hollow finality, and his stomach tightened not from fullness, but from something heavier. The disappointment lodged itself beneath his ribs, and nostalgia curdled into silence. He left the seat, tossed the rest away, and stepped outside with a heaviness I hadn't seen on him in years. On the bus home, he looked up the restaurant, expecting maybe a dip in reviews or a staff change. Instead, he found a chain of events he never imagined. An inspection in March 2024 recorded the walk-in freezer at 30 degrees, warm enough to sink any claim of proper storage. Probes meant to test meat temperatures carried old residue, and no proper method for cleaning them was in place. The restaurant closed, reopened, then closed again in July after officers found it still unfit to trade. By May 2025, the company admitted 7 offences and stood before magistrates to accept fines totalling more than £16,000. Only after training and repairs did the place climb to a rating of 3, but that number couldn't erase what had been uncovered. His disappointment shifted as he scrolled through the reports. He kept asking how it slipped so far. Was it new management? Was it pressure to cut costs? Was it the kind of slow neglect that creeps in when no one checks the corners? He couldn't point to any single cause, and that uncertainty only deepened the sting. This was the place tied to his first dates, to cheap dinners, after rainy shifts to the smell of late evenings on Cowley Mill Road. Now it felt like a stranger wearing familiar clothes. He told me later that something inside him had torn a little. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet rip he knew wouldn't mend. From now on, whenever he walks past that stretch of pavement, he'll carry a wound no stitch can cover. Tretra Zuma, Canterbury. Zuma carried a glow that made its fall sharper, a restaurant praised for warmth and colour, yet marked with a 0 when inspectors stepped through its door in April 2025. That rating alone was enough to stop most diners in their tracks. The details underneath it cut even deeper. Hot water at the hand wash basin failed. Towels were missing. Raw meat sat above ready-to-eat dishes. Microwaves and freezers faltered. The floor and ceiling showed damage that had gone on too long, and a past pest problem lingered without a proper contract to keep it away. The picture formed by those notes left little room for excuses. A place like this often leans on charm lanterns hanging low, warm tones on the wall tables, dressed with small touches meant to lift the mood. You could see where money had gone. The room invited you in even on a cold evening, and the air held the faint sweetness of spices the moment you stepped inside. Yet that investment seemed to chase appearance more than essence. The impulse to grow, to compete, to draw attention with colour and comfort can nudge owners away from the hard, unglamorous work that keeps a kitchen safe. Money poured into decor loses its meaning when the basics fall apart out of sight. What should have mattered sat in the background waiting for someone to take it seriously. Clear routines, reliable equipment, steady control of storage, and the discipline that holds all those threads together. Those are not the elements that attract photos or online praise. They do not charm a visitor in the first minute. They live in the corners, the sinks, the logs, and the checks that repeat day after day. When ambition reaches further than care, those corners gather dust. the rating only surfaced the truth that had lived there longer than most diners realised. Wider forces press in on small restaurants now. Competition stiffens each year. Menu boards glow brighter across the high street. New chains appear with clean branding and tidy messaging. Everyone knows food alone rarely wins attention in a landscape like that, so places lean into atmosphere, stories and presentation. Yet for all that effort, the heart of a meal has never changed. A small room with a handful of tables can earn affection if the plates coming out of the kitchen honour their ingredients. A cramped kitchen can build a following if the work behind the past stays honest. Diners, especially those who return year after year, judge with their senses before they ever notice the decoration. Ambience brings people through the door, but only food prepared with care keeps them. No amount of wall art hides the taste of ingredients stored at the wrong temperature. No candle or mural softens the knowledge that basic hygiene broke down behind the scenes. A restaurant, no matter how charming, cannot expect loyalty when the fundamentals slip beneath the standard any diner should be able to assume without asking. A Zuma's decline speaks to that tension. A place loved for its atmosphere must still protect the trust that diners bring with them. When that trust cracks, the room feels different even if nothing on the surface changes. That is why the rating mattered so much. It revealed what ambience could not fix. It reminded anyone paying attention that standards rest on preparation, not presentation. As the door closes on this case, the line between appearance and substance becomes clearer, and it sets the stage for the next story waiting down the road, another place shaped by choices made behind its own kitchen door. Fimj Omdra Cafe, Liverpool. A small neighbourhood cafe is expected to provide a certain steadiness, straightforward service, clean preparation, and the quiet reliability that makes a morning feel anchored. Omdra once met those expectations. Its counter carried a familiar warmth, its window seats offered simple comfort, and the atmosphere relied on modest routines rather than performance. Those traits formed the baseline against which its recent decline becomes clearer. A return visit shows the contrast. Tables sit at uneven angles, suggesting a lapse in attention to basic order. Air quality feels heavy, neither fresh nor stale, a sign of ventilation or cleaning delays. Light along the counter exposes marks that should have been removed through routine wiping. These conditions indicate not an isolated off day, but early symptoms of operational drift details, small on their own, yet consistent with a workspace losing discipline. The effect becomes more apparent when food reaches the table. Bread arrives dry at the edges, a common result of prolonged exposure to warm air. A knife leaves faint streaks that point to insufficient rinsing. The cup for tea carries a slight tack in the handle, hinting at improper washing or drying. Each detail falls within the category of minor faults, but together they demonstrate a pattern of weakened standards within a setting that depends heavily on fundamentals. Inspection records confirm what the sensory cues suggest. Omdra received a 0 rating in June 2025, with urgent improvement required across hygiene practices, structural conditions, and management oversight. The rating remained unchanged in November. Notes reference issues in storage, cleaning schedules, and procedural control. Such findings typically reflect not a single misstep, but a period of accumulated neglect during which routine checks, particularly those related to temperature, food contact surfaces, and waste handling, fail to receive consistent attention. The broader impact of this decline lies in the erosion of predictable quality. Older diners, who form a notable portion of the cafe's regular base, often recognize subtle changes before formal reports surface. Variations in sound smell and surface cleanliness communicate shifts in internal discipline. When these shifts persist, they influence customer confidence even before any official rating becomes public. There is evidence of an attempt to stabilize the business. Fresh paint appears on the walls. New lamps hang over the tables. A recently printed menu suggests an effort to reintroduce order and improve presentation. These measures indicate awareness that the cafe's image requires restoration. However, the foundation remains tied to practical routines rather than cosmetic adjustments. The work that rebuilds trust: consistent cleaning, accurate storage, controlled temperature systems, and visible adherence to basic hygiene, is slower and less noticeable than a refreshed interior. The difficulty of recovering trust is a central point here. Once standards fall below the level expected of a small community cafe, the pathway back demands more than surface improvement. A strengthened appearance may help attract initial attention, but confidence in food safety and daily care returns only when diners observe consistent, error-free operation over time. That threshold is higher when a 0 rating has been recorded and maintained for several months. Omdra's situation reflects the wider reality facing small food businesses. Reputational recovery depends on the fundamentals, not the trimmings. Customers may appreciate decor and ambiance, but those factors cannot compensate for deficiencies in preparation or oversight. A cafe can rebuild its image, yet the clarity and comfort associated with first impressions rarely return at the same pace. These conditions define its status today, a venue making visible efforts to regain footing while still carrying the weight of lapses that undermined confidence in the first place. 6th 1K Chinatown. 1K tested my patience before the first bite even landed. The spoon hit the table with a sharper clink than it should. The tea cooled too quickly. The server slipped past me without a glance, and that small sting of being overlooked settled in my chest long before the food reached the table. These were only tiny irritations, the kind you brush off in a busy Chinatown dining room, yet they carried a faint echo of something deeper. Steam lifted from the bowl in slow, uneven strands. The broth gave off a muted scent, thin where it should have held depth. A faint trace of detergent clung to the rim of the glass. The chopsticks left a tacky whisper on my fingertips. None of these details screamed danger, but each pointed toward a kitchen drifting away from its own rhythm. Chinatown eateries live and die by their sense of order behind the noise, and the noise here felt louder than the order. The reports explained why. Inspectors traced lines of mice along the storeroom edges. They found cockroaches tucked behind cooking equipment. Droppings hid in the thin seam where the wall met the tile. Records meant to track temperature were falsified, stitched together to give the impression of control. When the case reached court, the company admitted to 11 offences. The fines crossed £40,000, and a director stood beside the business to answer for notices that should have forced sweeping changes long ago. Late in 2024, a re-inspection brought the rating to 2, a number that signals effort, but also confirms how far the slide had gone. The weight of that history presses against the restaurant's long-established story. 1K once thrived on legend-brisk staff, crowded tables, bowls arriving at high speed, and a charm that came from organised chaos. People spoke of it with affection. Students, night workers, tourists all packed into those floors at one point or another. The reputation felt immovable, as if decades of memories could hold a building upright, even when the foundation was cracking. I kept thinking about that first moment the bowl touched my table. The tremble in the surface, the smell too faint to comfort the sluggish rise of steam. Those signs were small when I noticed them, but once matched with the inspection records, they formed a single picture. Improvements had been made since the worst findings, yet the shadow of those days hung over every detail. Near the window, an older couple sat with quiet familiarity. The woman stirred her noodles with a puzzled tilt of her head. The man lifted the teapot, paused, and set it down with careful fingers, as if judging whether he trusted the spout. Their silence was not discontent, it was confusion in a place that had never needed excuses. Regulars rarely speak their doubts aloud. Years of habit soften suspicion until it sits like a pebble in the shoe. My own meal cooled untouched. The clatter of plates and the hum of voices felt out of step with the room's deeper truth. Chinatown should be a place of disciplined kitchens, sharp preparation and respect for the craft. When a long-favoured spot lets its standards unspool, the disappointment stretches beyond one table. It reaches anyone who ever believed the history of a venue could shield it from decline. I pushed the bowl aside and stepped back into the street. The lamps cast long streaks of light across the pavement, and the steady flow of people moved past without noticing the knot in my stomach. The tiredness that settled over me had nothing to do with the food. It came from realizing how quietly a landmark can dim. Some places lose their footing so slowly that you only see the truth when the dish in front of you stops tasting like the story you grew up hearing. 7 London Hilton Park Lane, Westminster. A 5-star hotel rarely invites doubt, yet the London Hilton on Park Lane received a 0 rating in September 2024. The contrast was stark, a landmark associated with prestige handing over a score normally tied to struggling takeaways. That number formed the baseline for everything that followed, and it forced the kitchen into an unflattering clarity few expected. Guests who visited around that period described small signs of fatigue. A plate arrived with a trace of warmth fading too quickly. A cup set down with a slight smudge at the base. A bread roll carrying a softness that suggested time spent outside optimal storage. These were not dramatic faults, only the kind of inconsistencies that hint at systems slipping behind the scenes. In venues built on polish, such details often speak louder than any headline. Food safety consultants were blunt when asked how a luxury site can reach the bottom of the scale. One explained that prestige has no bearing on compliance. The checklist is identical whether you run a corner cafe or a high-cost kitchen. Another described the usual cause as procedures drifting out of alignment, adding that minor lapses accumulate quickly in large hotels, where volume and speed place pressure on staff. Former inspectors echoed the same pattern. Problems rarely begin with a single incident, but with routine steps missed, logs skipped and maintenance delayed until the margin for error disappears. Reports from the inspection period suggested gaps in day-to-day control that would have felt unremarkable on their own but became significant when placed together. Temperature checks that needed tighter regularity. Cleaning steps completed without full verification. Storage routines that required firmer oversight. None of these issues were unique to the Hilton, yet the setting made them sharper. Guests assume consistency at this level, and when the foundation wavers, the illusion of smooth service breaks with it. Those working in the industry added another layer. A long-serving chef speaking generally about high-end hotels noted that pressure to keep service seamless can mask early warning signs. A manager from another Westminster venue described the challenge as balancing guest expectation with the discipline that happens out of sight, pointing out that the front-of-house glow can create a false sense of security. Such comments formed a quiet consensus. Luxury does not prevent decline, it only hides it for longer. The re-inspection in March 2025 lifted the rating to 4. New protocols tightened weak points, and additional training reinforced consistency. Equipment checks were updated, record-keeping stabilized, and oversight returned to a level expected from a site of this scale. Staff described the period as demanding but necessary, with one saying it reset the floor under our feet. The improvement demonstrated recovery, yet the leap from 0 to 4 carried its own weight. Restored order cannot erase the fact that the rating fell that far in the first place. What lingers now is the reminder that reputations, no matter how grand, cannot insulate a kitchen from the standards written into law. A distinguished dining room may glow under warm lights, and the service may move with well-rehearsed calm, but the real measure lies in corners most diners never see. The Hilton regained its footing, yet the memory of how quickly it slipped remains part of its story, the kind that stays in mind long after the plate has left the table. Across these cases, the settings change, the prices shift, and the decor rises or falls, yet the pattern circles back to one simple truth. A restaurant stands on the judgment of two sides, the discipline of those who run it, and the expectations of those who walk through the door. When owners loosen their grip on standards, the slide begins quietly. When customers accept too little, the slide continues. Neither force acts alone. Together they shape the level of care that settles into the kitchen, the dining room, and the meal placed on the table. If both sides tighten their stance, if owners treat hygiene as a daily duty, and diners insist on nothing less than safe, well-made food, the cycle breaks. Problems surface earlier, corrections land faster, and businesses return to the purpose that once defined them, serving honest meals and leaving people with memories worth keeping.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.